coming tonight. I see so many new faces, and I imagine it's because of your interest or your involvement in the area of homelessness, which is a subject that the Southern Delaware Alliance for Racial Justice has listed as one of their priorities. For those of you who don't know much about the Alliance, we were established with a mission of educating, informing, and advocating for racial justice and social justice. And what we've done is we've looked into the different parts of our state, our educational system, our criminal justice system, our housing system, employment system, to look at the disparities. And before any of you say they don't exist, they do. They're documented every place. And so we look at them, and then we try to inform the community at large that we really do have issues. And we can't solve those issues. What we can do is become much more enlightened about the issues. We can have a public discourse together. And that is our goal, to meet with people like you and myself and those of us who comprise the Alliance, and have the conversation in the hopes that we'll change the public narrative, in the hopes that we can update all of our thinking about why these disparities exist, why racial injustices and social injustices exist. Or you can read your local paper. Just right now we're concentrating on the state legislative body is concentrating on the criminal justice system, because they're at a point of saying, we've got to change our system. It's not an objective system, it doesn't add to public safety, and it doesn't do anything to reduce our recidivism rate. But you're not here to hear about that, but I did want to give those of you who are new a little taste of what we do. Now, 2 weeks ago, we normally meet the second Tuesday of the month, but 2 weeks ago we had our March town hall, and it was on racism and anti-Semitism. And for those of you who came, I want to thank you. It was a wonderful turnout. We had more than 150 people here. And then there were those people who called to complain that they couldn't get to the parking lot, so they weren't able to participate. We had two wonderful speakers from the Seaside Jewish community and from the University of Delaware, who presented some information on racism and anti-Semitism. That was step one in a conversation that the Alliance and the Women's March and the Seaside Jewish Center are going to continue for the rest of the year. So in May, we are bringing in the Anti-Defamation League, and we hope that you will join us. We hope that they will add to the information. What does it look like now in Delaware in terms of anti-Semitism and racism? I mean, we know what it looked like in Pittsburgh a couple of months ago. We know what it looked like 2 days ago in Louisiana when 3 black churches got burned down, not accidentally. And so we hope that the ADL will be able to inform us. Following that, we're going to have a series of small group discussions. And we hope that Don will tell you more about it, but we hope that you'll sign up and join us in those small group discussions. One of our native sons and the person that I admire the most, Brian Stevenson, said, to change that public discourse, or to have that public discourse, is for the purpose of changing the public narrative. And we have to talk about uncomfortable things with people that we're usually uncomfortable with. And there were some other parts of that formula that he had, but that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to have the conversation with each other, because we really haven't had much of a conversation. Let me move on, because we have a great panel presentation, but I have 2 more announcements. For those of you who have never been here before, what I do is usually do a few announcements in terms of regular business, and then we'll turn over to these wonderful people who are here to talk. Camp Rehoboth, and all of you know Camp Rehoboth, has an annual women's event, Women's Fest. And they are inviting all of you to participate in Broad Walk on the Boardwalk. Love the title. Probably only they can get away with calling us broads. That's going to be on Sunday, April 14th at the Boardwalk at 9 o'clock. I'll leave a brochure in the back in case you want to read about it. If you get home early, and we tend to finish up at 8:30, tonight at 9 o'clock, there's a new series called Reconstruction, American After the Civil War. It's a four-week series. It's written and produced by Henry Louis Gates Jr., and I think it might be worth looking at. At the same time, Times Magazine decided to do a full article this week on the Reconstruction period. So there's some reason America wants us to know about the Reconstruction period. Yes?
Do you know what station it's on?
PBS.
PBS.
Yes.
And it
Nine.
plays again at midnight.
And it plays again at midnight. Amy thinks you'll all stay up to tape it. With that, I'm going to hush and turn everything over to Don Peterson, who is our moderator for the night.
Thanks, Charlotte, and thank you all for being here tonight on what I think is going to be a very enlightening and thought-provoking evening for all of us. We all have something to learn about the issue of homelessness. But before we get started, I want to do a little commercial. I'd like to remind everybody that the amazing musical event that the Alliance is co-sponsoring with the Unitarian Universalists of Southern Delaware. It's coming up this Friday, April 12th at 7 o'clock at the UU Church on Route 9. The concert is called Deeper Than the Skin. And I can promise you it's unlike anything that's ever been presented in Sussex County. It stars Reggie Harris and Greg Greenway. This concert really does serve as a continuation of the ongoing conversation that we've been having about race and racism in a way that's both entertaining and thought-provoking and really enjoyable. Born 3 days apart, their ancestry flows through the same portal of history, good old Richmond, Virginia. As you can imagine, they had two very different backgrounds growing up. Reggie and Greg have been on a pilgrimage together, one that began over 30 years ago. The racial divisions that are the reality of America started them in two different worlds, but the amazing bonds of music, mutual respect, sheer admiration, and shared vision have brought them together as friends and colleagues. And we have a special deal for you tonight. The tickets are on sale in the back. Charlotte's got the tickets. Charlotte and Trina have got the tickets. They're on sale tonight for $15. That's a $5 discount from what you're going to pay at the door. So get your tickets tonight. And if you have kids in your life, we've got a special price for them of $5 for anyone 18 years or under. So it's a great deal. It's going to be a fun evening, and I think we're all going to come back from it with a lot of great thoughts. So, back to our regular scheduled program. You might have noticed lately that there's been a significant amount of coverage on the issue of homelessness right here in our own Cape Gazette. In fact, one of our guests tonight, Jim Martin, raise your hand, Jim. Jim Martin just had a commentary in the Cape Gazette about what he's trying to do with respect to bringing tiny houses to Sussex County. He does some remarkable work at the office, Shepherd's office, sorry Jim, just get that screwed up. So we're seeing that the issue of homelessness is starting to percolate and people are becoming more and more aware of it. And you might wonder why the Southern Delaware Alliance for Racial Justice has decided to do a presentation on homelessness. because, like so many other aspects of our society, education, criminal justice, housing, banking, people of color, particularly African Americans, are disproportionately affected by homelessness. One of the statistics is that nationwide, African Americans make up more than 40% of the homeless population, but represent only 13% of the general population. Meanwhile, whites are significantly underrepresented among the homeless population. So there is definitely a racial disparity there that needs to be addressed. Tonight we're going to be hearing about the issue of homelessness right here in Delaware, right here in Sussex County, right here in this beautiful resort town of Lewis and Rehoboth. It's real, it's here. And before we start with the program, I just want to acknowledge the hard work that Carol Zorek has put in pulling this program together. Carol really has taken this and run with it, and unfortunately she couldn't be here tonight, otherwise you'd be looking at her and not me. That's really unfortunate, I know. We're very fortunate tonight to have 3 experts in the field of homelessness. And what I'm going to do is just introduce them briefly and then turn it over to them. The first person I'd like to introduce is here on my left, immediate left, Janet Idema. Janet is the board president and founder of the Emmanuel Shelter, which is a Code Purple shelter here in Rehoboth Beach. And as it happens, the shelter is closing for the season tomorrow morning. And there are people right now who are looking for places to stay. But don't be fooled. When the Code Purple shelter closes, the work of Emmanuel Shelter doesn't. It continues all year round as they provide services for the homeless people here in the area. Next to Janet is Rachel Stucker. Rachel is the Associate Director of the Delaware Housing Authority, where she leads the agency's work to prevent and end homelessness in Delaware. And then finally, on the far left, is Marie Marole, is the Executive Director of Sussex County Crisis Housing Services in Georgetown, which provides temporary housing and case management and referral services to the clients while they are in temporary housing. I'm sure that they will each speak more about their own organizations and hopefully a little bit more about themselves. So for now, if you would, please welcome our speakers for this evening. Now tonight's format is going to be pretty much the same as it usually is. Each of our guests will be given 10 to 15 minutes to talk about their programs, their focus, the things that they're really working on, and then we'll have plenty of time after that for Q&As. And I'll try to keep track of the time, so if you see me going like this, it probably means I'm not exercising. I'm saying, wrap it up. I'll try to keep us on time. So, with that, let's begin. So first we'll introduce Janet Idema.
Thank you.
Never can quite figure out how to work with these. Can you hear me in the back?
Yeah.
Enough, Katie. Okay. Thank you for inviting me here this evening. I always like to have the opportunity to talk about a topic that's near and dear to my heart, but also near and dear to the heart of this area and this community. Just a brief plug, without the community, Emmanuel Shelter wouldn't exist, because it's the community that supports us both financially, but also with volunteers who come in and work shifts for us and stay with our guests, also provide food, also go out and fundraise for us and help us to just make things happen. So we're lucky enough for an organization which is not tremendously big to have over 250 volunteers. So we are really fortunate and we're grateful for every one of them. I was asked to talk a little bit about Code Purple, what it means, what that's like. Susan Kent, unfortunately, who is the president of the Sussex County Homeless Coalition, dinner. And she, I had asked her to come and maybe share a little bit of the statistics with me about the county in general. So I'm going to be speaking more to our immediate area, Lewis, Rehoboth, and the Dewey area, to give you an idea of who we see and what we do. Co-Purple definition of that is that we open up a safe place for people to be when the temperature here in Delaware, with wind chill or without, drops below 32 degrees. Sounds simple. Except that that means for many years what we did was decide if 33 degrees was not cold purple, and if 36 degrees meant we didn't have to worry, we had to worry even less. And if it was supposed to snow, but it was going to be 36, well, maybe it would be okay if it was slushy. Those are the kinds of conversations we originally had 10 years ago. I've been doing this for 10 pleasant and sometimes long years. And when we first started, it was difficult because we're in borrowed space. We're using churches, we're using storefronts, we're using any place that will kind of let us be there. So it makes it a little more difficult. Finally, about 4 years ago, we decided as an organization that we were going to open on a date and we were going to close on a date. So regardless of the weather, we wanted people to know that they were welcome to come from December 1st until approximately April 1st to April 15th each year. And that was through the good graces of Faith United Methodists, who gave us their fellowship hall to use. And so they worked with us, and we were then allowed to have people there 7 days a week for that almost 5.5-month period of time. Now all the shelters in Sussex County stay open each night as they're able. Some of the shelters on the western side of the county have a little more difficulty because they use all volunteers. Because we're in a home and we're a guest of Faith, we have hired staff. So we usually have 2 staff on every shift. We're also one of the few shelters that takes both men and women in a Code Purple situation. You have to remember, Code Purple, nobody is vetted, so we have no idea who comes to our door. And our goal is to keep everyone safe and to keep the facility in good repair. And we've been very successful over the past few years in doing that. And so we feel really grateful about that. We were the first Code Purple to open down south of Wilmington, and we opened in 2010, and Kent County followed the next season quickly after us. And what's taken us, we have about 7 Code Purples now. What's taken us about 10 years to build, Kent County built in 1 year. They built 52 organizations that offered support to have Code Purples, designed an elaborate system, got transportation from churches where they took people for dinner to where they were going to sleep, pulled it together literally overnight, and opened it towards the end of our first season once they heard about us. So there's something to be said for living in a big city, even though Dover's not a big city, it's still a city, and to have that kind of organization. We've been trying for 10 years to pull together organizations and churches here. And I have to tell you, going door to door to every church, I only had 2 churches that said yes. So you'd be surprised. You would really be surprised. Now, on the other hand, we have 1 million churches that cook for us and come in and help us. But the buildings themselves was a whole different issue. Very, very difficult to do. So the other organization that runs the Code Purples in the county down here is the Coalition for Homelessness through Love, Inc., in the name of Christ. And that organization is primarily from Georgetown over in the western side of the county. They asked me to talk a little about our statistics. Of course, I don't have this year's done yet, but I do have some comparisons from last year. Emmanuel served 122 distinct individuals last year, 17 to 18 season. This year we saw only 86 individuals, which is a 30% decrease, but I think that's because another 6 or 7 Code Purples were opened throughout the county. So some of we haven't met yet to determine, but some of our guests probably travel through various of the Code Purples that are around, including primarily probably Georgetown. So we've seen a little bit less this year. The eastern side of the county served 150 individuals, and what we've seen different this year from previous years, we have a growing number of men with children, and intact families, and elderly. And that is a tremendous change. So it's not our typical statistics of 25 to like 45 or 50 years old. We're seeing a lot more complicated cases. We don't take families at Emmanuel. It's one of the things that we really need to look at for next year. It's a serious deficit on this side of the county. There is just no place. When a family comes to us, we either send them to the one or two Code Purples that are available, or we try to put them up in a hotel for a brief period of time. A whole new group of fathers with their children has come up too, and that's really been a big change. And so there are a couple of Code Purples within the county that provide some support for that, but not enough. And I think you would be surprised to know that the majority of our guests stay between a month to less than a month. So these are not people that come on December 1st for the most part and don't leave until April 15th. We see an awful lot of guests, maybe 35 to 40% that come for anywhere from 5 to 7 days. So it's a brief turnover while they go into the next place they were looking or waiting for, or while they get back into the place they were temporarily thrown out of, or while they transit through to do something else. The majority of our guests, as I said before, are between 20 and 50, but we are seeing about 15 to 18% of elderly at this point. About 80% of the individuals that we serve have been homeless for less than a year. So that whole concept of chronically homeless and always out there, I would say that was a larger trend about 8 years ago when we first opened. The majority of people that we saw in our Code Purple were people who were chronically homeless. That's not the case anymore. As a matter of fact, most of our chronically homeless are housed for much more so than the past seasons. So that's a bit of a change. When we ask people why they became homeless or when they became homeless, a lot of the data is skewed because we have a lot of blanks left in those statements when we ask people. But 47% of those asked would not disclose their reason for homelessness. But 36% said that it was primarily for lack of rent, lack of funds for rent, eviction, or asked to leave by a roommate or person that they were living with. So, and I know other people will speak to the housing, but that's a really big issue as to where to go. 70% of the individuals stay with us less than 30 days. We don't really have a lot of time to make a difference. So sometimes people say, well, you can have a shelter, but you have to have some success stories. You have to have, what wonderful things did you do? And sometimes, I say to myself, I can't lose 5 pounds in 30 days. We're supposed to turn people's lives around, get them out of chronic homelessness, get them substance abuse treatment, get them a job, oh, by the way, get them a resume. And if they happen to be illiterate, also teach them to read. And if they have chronic pain, address that as well, without any support services. Because typically what a Code Purple shelter does is house you overnight and keep you safe so that you don't freeze in the freezing cold.
Couple minutes, Jen.
Okay. Many of the medical problems that our guests have include things like hypertension, depression, substance abuse, anxiety, and one that I think is really, really underdiagnosed, which is post-traumatic stress disorder. And I think it's underdiagnosed for a lot of reasons. Number one, I think the guests themselves don't realize that they have post-traumatic stress disorder. And a lot of staff are not trained to see what that means and how to recognize it. So I know that is a governor's push this year for us to get knowledge of, but I think it's really important for us to start training our guests as well as the staff. We train all our volunteers on post-traumatic stress, what it means, how to recognize it, and how not to become reactive, and how to help people calm down. A lot of guests come to us without criminal histories and leave with criminal histories. Things like walking down Route 1 without a flashlight at night will get you a fine. If you're found again and haven't paid your fine, it'll get you arrested. If you haven't paid your child support because you haven't been working, that will get you arrested. If you have indecent exposure because you happen to be urinating, that will get you arrested. And in the state of Delaware, that's a Class 1 sexual offense. Panhandling will get you arrested. Loitering will get you arrested. Having an illegal substance, of course, will get you arrested. And prostitution will get you arrested. So the difficulties are that plenty of people come here, they don't necessarily have a criminal history, but they leave with one for simple stuff. That maybe we could find ways to address. It's big questions, ways to address differently to prevent that, because then that feeds into not being able to get employment. This year, I will say that we had 17 guests at our shelter who now have jobs. That's remarkable for us. We have almost 100% of our guests who have resumes, who want to go to work. That's a really big deal. And they've gotten jobs in restaurants, construction, landscaping, housekeeping. And one local hotel started with 2 of our guests 3 years ago, now employs 7 of our guests. And so they employ them in housekeeping and food service, which is really nice. That's a really big thing. Sometimes it's a never-ending cycle, because if you don't have a place to get dressed and clean up and look good and go to work or sleep, then it's hard to hold a job. And then when you do have a job, and I'm sure Rachel will probably speak to this, housing in the county is outrageously expensive and difficult and not so available. Just, let's see, how much time do I have? 2 minutes? I'm out? Okay, let me see the most important thing I wanted to say. The most important thing I think I just wanted to sum up by saying Emmanuel Shelter has been individually and collectively fighting this fight for 10 years. Our most recent fight, and I want to say that our attorney and our building planner are all pro bono. Our most recent fight is opening the church on Route 9. We lost that fight on a technicality. It had nothing to do with the shelter. That technicality was simply that a lawyer decided to take to a judge the idea that the county council could not make a decision for a special use exemption for a non-paying shelter. They could do it if we were a tourist home and charged $1 a day for breakfast, but not for a non-paying shelter. So we had purchased the shelter knowing that we had gotten that special use exemption. Once we purchased it, that special use exemption was removed, and we lost our ability to use the building. We now have to go back for conditional use, which can sometimes take about 2.5, 3 years, which is why we wanted the special use to open sooner. So now we're in the process, you'll see us, we're in the process of starting that particular road again. So that's where Emmanuel Shelter is at. So thank you for listening.
Hello, okay, this one works as well. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Rachel Stucker. I'm Associate Director at Housing Alliance Delaware. I think you might have said the Housing Authority, so I just want to correct. I'm not with the Housing Authority, but close. Housing Alliance Delaware, we're a nonprofit entity, not a state entity, so we're a statewide nonprofit agency, and we our primary focus is around affordable housing and homelessness. We also do some work in the community development sector. And so I'll talk a little bit about what we do as an agency and then a little bit about homelessness in the state in Sussex County. So as an agency, particularly around housing and homelessness, we're really a convener, facilitator, coordinator agency. We do very little in the way of direct service to folks who are homeless, so very different than what Janet and her folks do at Code Purple. We really work more in the realm of policy, planning, data, advocacy, and that type of thing. Around homelessness, we're what's called the Continuum of Care Lead Agency for the state of Delaware. So pretty much what that means is that we help to coordinate and facilitate a response to homelessness at the statewide level. So we have the Continuum of Care as a membership volunteer group. If you're interested in joining, please be in touch. We meet quarterly and rotate locations throughout the state. So we're a statewide membership of over 70 folks, 70 people and agencies. Anyone interested in homelessness is welcome to join and participate. We also have a volunteer board that meets regularly, and we're really working to try to figure out how to end homelessness in Delaware, right? Our goal is to end homelessness, and we see it as something that is doable and achievable, and I'll talk a little bit about that. So we're really trying to figure out, we have all of these great entities all throughout the state doing great work, meeting people's needs, trying to get folks employed, trying to get folks housed. How do we take what we know about homelessness in Delaware and make sure that we're decreasing homelessness in our state to the extent that we possibly can, meeting people's most immediate basic needs, and really trying to coordinate a system of services, a system of care, a system of housing that will get people out of homelessness and stable in housing as quickly as possible. So that's really kind of what we're about as the Continuum of Care Lead Agency. And we also collect a lot of data about homelessness. We administer the statewide data system, which is called the Community Management Information System. So a lot of programs, it's not always their favorite thing to do, looking at Marie, enter data about the clients that they serve into that system. And so as the administrator of that system, we can pull a lot of data about homelessness statewide, from all the way up in Wilmington down to Sussex County. Really when we're thinking about homelessness, we're really looking at homelessness as primarily a housing issue. We really basically put if someone has housing, they're not homeless. So when you think about folks who are homeless, a lot of times I think what comes to people's mind is that there must be something deficient or wrong with that person who's having that experience. But really, the only thing that makes them different than anyone else is that they lack a stable place to live. Most people, for example, is that better? Okay. So most people, for example, who have a substance use disorder are not homeless. There's nothing about that makes someone need to be homeless, right? Homelessness, in essence, is a housing issue. It does not mean that folks don't have other needs. There aren't any complex things going on. People come to homelessness for a variety of reasons, whether it's because of family conflict, they're fleeing domestic violence, poverty, inability to pay rent, loss of a job. A lot of folks who are experiencing poverty are one crisis away from not being able to make rent and risk their housing. So we're really looking at homelessness as primarily a housing issue. And so we really work to promote the idea that everyone deserves a place to live, a safe and stable place to live of their own. And that as a community, we really think that we can solve that problem if we can get our resources aligned and get the people with the need to the supply. So I'll talk a little bit about the need and some of the data. So each night in Delaware, and we know this from many years of collecting data, approximately 1,000 people are sleeping on the streets or in shelters. By streets, I mean that could be in a car, someplace not meant for human habitation. So a car, a shed maybe, especially in rural areas, sheds, garages, abandoned buildings, or literally on the streets or in encampments and tents and that type of thing in the woods. So we're at about 1,000 people a night here in Delaware, and annually, that's more than 3,500 people, somewhere between 3,500 and 4,000 people. 1 in 5 of those people is a child under the age of 18. Most of the time, the children are sheltered. It's very rare to find young children unsheltered in the state, which is a great thing. That doesn't mean it never happens, especially because folks who find themselves in that situation are very reluctant to seek assistance kids for, fear of involvement with family services and that type of thing. But generally, we don't see a lot of that in Delaware, which is a good thing. But 1 in 5 people who are homeless at any given time in Delaware is a child. And of the single adult population, so single males and females, 1 out of 3 has a diagnosed disability of some kind, whether that's a physical disability, a mental health disability, behavioral health, etc. And when we think about equity in terms of racial justice and ethnicity, similar to, but actually worse than the national trends here in Delaware. So the African American population in Delaware is about 22-23%. Regularly each year when we look at the data for at least the past 10 years, of the people who are homeless in Delaware, 60% are African American. And among households with children, it's even higher. 76% of households with children who are homeless in Delaware will be African American each year. So the rates, the African Americans are very disproportionately impacted by the trauma of homelessness. And we can think about probably lots of causal factors for that. So discrimination in access to housing, barriers to housing. So, we think about the criminal justice side of things. When we think about how the African American population is disproportionately targeted and impacted by the criminal justice system. As soon as someone has criminal justice involvement, in the same way that it's a barrier to employment, it is very much a barrier to housing. And generally when we think about the wealth gap, right? So the ability to afford housing and pay rent, that is also, I'm sure, a contributing factor. In terms of geography, about 65% of everyone who is homeless in Delaware is in Newcastle County, about 20-22% in Kent County at any given time. Sussex County, 11 to 13% in that range at any given time. But we also hear anecdotally from folks who provide services in Sussex County that number can change fairly dramatically based on the weather. In summertime, there may be some increases, folks coming to find employment during the season down here in the beach and resort areas. So, a lot of our data, our annual trend data, is captured during the winter months. So we are actually planning to conduct what we call a point-in-time count. It's a one-night count of homelessness. We do it statewide every January. We are planning to do a special summer count in Sussex County this year in the summer. So if you are interested in volunteering or participating, please feel free to seek me out at Housing Alliance Delaware. I'm going to leave a handout for you all with some of the data and information that I have talked about. You can grab it on your way out. It's on the table on your way out. And my contact information is there. And so what we do on the point-in-time count is we send folks, we get to teams and we send folks out to places where we think people may be sleeping outside. We also make sure to capture information about people who are sleeping in purple shelters or other shelters and try to get a snapshot of who's homeless at any given time in that community. So we are looking forward to trying to get a more comprehensive picture of homelessness in Sussex County by doing a similar thing in the during the summer months as well. So the need is fairly high in Delaware, as it is unfortunately in a lot of places, 1,000 people on any given night. In terms of resources, so when we look at the housing resources for folks, most people who are experiencing homelessness actually will do so for a very brief period of time, which aligns with what Janet was saying. When we look at national data as well as state data, we see that most people are going to have a crisis. They're going to have a brief period or episode of homelessness, and they're going to re-stabilize, whether it's with family or friends, whether it's they had a rental unit in mind, but they had a gap to be able to get into that unit, or maybe they just needed some financial assistance to be able to do so, and they're able to get that together and get into that next unit. It is a very small portion of the population, less than about 20%, who are going to be homeless for long periods of time. But those are folks who have really complex, usually very complex health needs. We do see, not only anecdotally, but in the data that the population generally in the United States is aging, and we're seeing that reflected in the homeless population as well, where we're seeing a lot more elderly folks with very complex health needs ending up in shelter programs or ending up on the streets. And unfortunately, what often happens to these folks is that they are not sick enough to be in nursing care, but they are far too ill to be properly cared for in a shelter environment. So we are seeing a lot of people with really complex health needs, or more than we used to, I would say a lot. Many more than we used to, who are ending up in this situation where they have nowhere to go, and are experiencing very, very complex health needs. Couple minutes, okay. So let me see. So in terms of what we do to try to intervene, so we have temporary interventions like shelter, as well as transitional housing for some folks, so places where people can temporarily stay and try to get stabilized. We also do have permanent housing interventions for folks who are homeless. And the two primary ways that that gets addressed statewide, and a lot of these programs operate statewide, is through what's called rapid rehousing and what's called permanent supportive housing. So rapid rehousing is really about trying to get someone out of homelessness, out of the shelter, off the street, into housing as quickly as possible, helping them identify a rental unit, helping them pay the security deposit, maybe first month's rent, and then working with them to try to stabilize them in that unit. Maybe it's they need help identifying childcare and getting employment or getting benefits, whatever it is, whatever their needs are, and working with them until they're stable and continue to provide some temporary rental assistance if they need it until they can take over the rent on their own. So we do have that statewide. We also have permanent supportive housing, and that's really geared towards that higher need chronic homeless population. It provides a permanent rental subsidy and also intensive services, so that that's geared towards folks with disabilities who are going to need some more intensive services to be able to stabilize in their housing. So those are the two kind of primary ways that the community is trying to intervene and provide some permanent housing options, some really stable options for these folks. The problem, of course, is that the need is much greater than the supply of those interventions. So, for example, we know right now that there are over 180 people. Some of those people are families with children, most are individuals, but there are about 180 people right now in Delaware who meet that definition of chronic homelessness, who are waiting for a housing unit. And so they're currently sleeping in shelters, outside, in cars, or on the streets. So we can take a really close look at that need data, but there just isn't a housing option for them. The other thing I'll mention before I close is this handout that I brought with me. So the National Low-Income Housing Coalition has a lot of really good data and information about the cost of housing. They do a lot of studies nationally. So this is specific to Sussex County. A Sussex County resident must earn $17.31 an hour to afford a 2-bedroom rental without being burdened by the cost of housing. And we obviously know that folks who are working in minimum wage jobs or primarily in the service industry are very unlikely to be making $17 an hour. If you're working minimum wage in Sussex County, you would have to work 84 hours a week to be able to afford a 2-bedroom rental. And as a whole, we know that the state of Delaware has the 15th highest bedroom wage, that's what that's called, so the cost of housing basically, 15th highest rental wage in the state, in the United States. So the cost of housing in Delaware is fairly high, and wages are not keeping up. And there are a lot of cities that you hear about at the national level where that's gone like totally out of control crisis mode. So like San Francisco is a really good example of that. And so we might not have a San Francisco level crisis here in Delaware, but particularly in Sussex County, the cost of housing is increasing very quickly, and wages and employment opportunities are not keeping up. So with that, I will close and pass it on to Marie.
Thank you. I am Marie Maroli. I'm the Executive Director of Sussex Community Crisis Housing Services, which is a mouthful. Most people know us by the Crisis House. And I could probably piggyback on a lot of the things that Rachel and Janet said by talking about some of the residents that we get, the referrals, and some of the issues. I could say ditto, ditto, ditto for a lot But just to give you a little background, the agency started in 1981 with the Crisis House as a homeless shelter just for fire victims. And through the years, it went from, as more homeless came into the realm, arena, from a 3-day stay for fire victims into a full-blown homeless shelter, which it is today. In the last couple years, we've gone from 30-day stay to almost a 90-day stay, and the state has allowed that. It used to regulate us at 30, but now because there's such a limit on housing and where people can go, we are able to keep them longer and work with them longer, trying to get them into permanent housing. Lots of times we can't, and they'll go on to another shelter or go back with a family member or a friend, or just kind of disappear into the sunset until they recycle again, and hopefully that time we'll be able to find them something. One of the secret things that we do that most people don't know that we do is we have transitional housing. We only have 5 units and a house. And so that is very limited in permanent housing for individuals or families. And we get calls every day. Do you have room? Do you have an opening? Which we do, because the people can stay in these programs for up to 2 years until they can matriculate out into a permanent setting. So we really, it's something that most people don't know we have, because we really don't advertise it. We would get inundated with requests that we couldn't fill. So we do have that program that we work with individuals to help them clean up their credit, get maybe better jobs. A lot of them will go to skills training and be able to acquire something that is more meaningful, and then move on into either subsidized housing through the state or through some of the rental programs, and leave the transitional housing. We've had success in that. I've had 3 of my families move into habitat homes. They were able to build habitat homes and move into that. Now that's 3 out of maybe 30, but that's a big success as far as I'm concerned. They were 3 single mothers that were able to move their families into homes, and they've all been in their homes for over 5 years, so they've been very successful with that. The different misconceptions that I think we get is people think we just serve Georgetown because that's where we're located. And homeless people don't just become homeless in Georgetown and stay there and come to the shelter. Homeless people move around from place to place looking for shelter, looking for housing. So we have a wide variety of individuals or families that come to the shelter from all over Sussex County. And sometimes through the centralized intake, we may even get a referral from Newcastle County or Kent County if we have an opening. But most of our service is for Sussex County. So we aren't a Georgetown service agency. We serve all of Sussex County. And sometimes that hinders us, and when we're asking for donations or we're going around looking for support, because a lot of times over in this side of town, they'll say, well, we only support programs, in the Rehoboth area. And it's kind of hard to get them to understand, but, people move around. We're not just serving Georgetown individuals. So it's hard to change that misconception. The other misconception we have is that we only serve offenders, ex-offenders, because the SCI is there. They feel that, all the guys come out of SCI and come to the shelter. And that isn't particularly true. We do serve a handful of ex-offenders, but that's not our primary service population. We serve men, women, and children. And one of the piggyback areas, we've had 2 fathers with children this year come to the shelter. So, which we, normally don't have. We have mothers with children. So we've seen that change also that has come. We've also seen a lot of older individuals for many reasons. They may, because of health, had to quit working. They may have lost a partner. They, can't pay their rent. They may have to leave where they're living. So we're seeing an older population come into the shelter. Right now, we have 2 women that are older and have major health issues, which we really have a hard time dealing with because that's not our, training, or we don't have the ability, we don't have the services, but it's hard to get them moved into some kind of healthcare facility. So it's been very, very, very painful for everybody trying to provide services for these 2 women and for them that there's really, they don't know where they're going to be next. So we've had different agencies come in to do evaluations, and we've been trying to work with many places to try to move them forward and get them into a stable, permanent location. I think when I got the email talking about the different kinds of homeless, I don't think there's one particularly type of homeless person that we see. I mean, we do see some of the chronic homeless that have drug and alcohol issues or mental health issues. And some of them are the ones that will cycle around and go to different shelters and then end up back with us. But we see the young women with children who have had issues. They've made bad decisions, or they're worn their welcome at home or with family members, so they'll cycle into the shelter. We have individuals that have lost a job, a spouse, or housing. Some, if the car breaks down, they have to fix the car to go to work, and then they don't have the rent money, so then that becomes a cycle. So we have a variety of different people that come through the shelter. Right now, we have 15 adults and 1 child. And I'd say, I think there's 11 of them that are working, and most of the men are working. They work at the chicken plants, and they work hard. It's not an easy job. It's not it's a pretty nasty job, but they work, and they're saving their money, and then where do we send them? We work very hard looking for places to try to find them permanent housing. And one of the programs that we're fortunate to get funded this year is a housing locator position. And this position is out there beating the bushes, the pavements, trying to develop housing for homeless and low-income individuals. Talking to landlords that will take the different vouchers, that will take the different subsidies, looking for individuals that are renting rooms or garage apartments or whatever. We call it the hidden housing market, and try to find these places that we can send a lot of our residents. And it won't be, it's just not for our agency, it will be for every agency that works with the homeless. Once we can develop some of these sites, we'll put it into a database that we can share with everyone. So far, we found, the housing locator found a couple of mobiles for rent, but they're out in Bridgeville, out in no man's land. So even a couple of our guys that are working at Purdue, they don't have transportation. They can get to Purdue, but they don't drive. They don't have cars, so they can't even try to get to, the housing. And that's one of the issues. The housing is so spread out in Sussex County. They're not going to come to Rehoboth to live for financial reasons. Georgetown really does not have a lot of housing. When I first started there 13 years ago, there were a lot of rooming houses, and we were able to send a lot of the guys to rent rooms. Well, through the years, the landlords kind of got tired of the you know, chasing down rents and so many people in and out. So they turned most of the rooming houses into single-family rentals. So we lost that source of sending our people out into housing. So it's that's a constant battle, the housing and transportation, once we, you know, do work through the different issues that they may have. Another program that we've been able to have, which really helps out, is Safe Harbor Mental Health Counseling. Comes to the center one day a week and works with the individuals that are having, you know, any kind of, just some, you know, maybe behavioral issues or just depression or just can't get that kickstart. So they're there one day a week to help them through some of the issues. And that's really been a nice addition to our program. We also hired a part-time case manager that is working specifically with employment, job search, and training opportunities. So that's also been an added service for this year. We always did job search and, you know, employment, but we didn't have one specific person that just worked on that. We also have a real exciting program, and Carol Wells from St. George's Chapel is here in the audience, and they are working with us to start a garden this year. I've been wanting this garden for I don't know how long, and Carol finally said, I'll do it, and so she has gone out and raised the funds and got the volunteers and gotten the project underway. So we'll be having our community garden this spring. We're starting any day now to get it underway. We have an empty lot next to the crisis house, so we have the ample space. So we're looking to that for not only a food supply for the shelter, but it'll give some job skills to the residents. It'll teach them working together in groups. We're going to teach them how to preserve and save and prepare, and we'll also share with the surrounding neighborhood. So that's another project we're real excited about that's coming up, and hopefully it'll continue throughout the next couple years. Okay. I don't know what else I could tell you about us. We, so I say we see probably over 100 people a year. We used to see more, but now they're staying longer, so we're not seeing as many people, but we're given as many nights of service. We're just not seeing as many people. Probably maybe about 150 a year, where we were seeing close to 200 because they cycle in and out further. But we're seeing an average of men and women are about the same amount. Children, it just depends. This year we've had 2 children so far this year. Sometimes people come in, mothers may come in with 3 or 4 kids, but you know, if not, they may come in with 1. So it depends. We can see up to maybe 15 or 20 kids a year. So it's, you know, our numbers just depends on how long of a stay the individuals have at the shelter. I think, you know, we work with the Alliance through centralized intake. That's where we get all of our referrals. And even though Rachel made a comment about the CMIS system, we've really grown to love it.
Good, I'm glad.
Yes, we have, and I think we've learned it much better, and we're able to put our information in and able to use the data to our advantage. So we don't dislike it at all. We work with the Way Home program, which is a program for the incarcerated gentlemen that are coming out of the SCI, and they provide a case manager. So we really don't have to do a lot with the gentlemen, and we have a pretty good relationship with them and good results. So that's pretty much where we get our referrals and what we do with them.
Thank you. Wow, pretty humbling, huh? Gosh. hats off to all of you who spend your time, energy, resources, working on such an important issue. We really do appreciate it. And now it's your time, and I know you're not shy. What we will ask you to do is, if you have a question or you have a brief statement, please come up to the mic and you can address it to all of our guests or one of them in particular. But I would ask you to keep your comments brief so that we have as much time as possible for Q&A.
Hi, thank you so much. One of the things, I know that there's a lot of research now that is finally recognizing that housing is healthcare and that it is the fundamental basis on which people's lives are changed. Another thing that I wanted to ask you was, none of you really mentioned veterans. And also, I know that a lot of the problems, especially of veterans or people with landlord-tenant issues, can be resolved by access to legal assistance. And I don't know, do you all have? I know there's legal aid in Delaware, but I don't know, is there a network of?
Right behind you.
I've summoned him. I used to work for a nonprofit law firm, that's why. And, you know, is there a network of pro bono attorneys that can help these people? But also I was interested in what the veteran situation is here, because so many of their problems are legal.
So I can talk about veteran homelessness briefly, if that's okay, but we've got legal aid here. So. Yeah, I think you probably see better, so if anyone wants to add. On a statewide level, we took on the mission to end veteran homelessness starting in 2015, and it really was a statewide effort. All the agencies were involved. There's been a huge investment since then at the federal level in resources for housing for homeless veterans. So when we first started the initiative in 2015, we were anywhere between 100 and 120 homeless veterans in Delaware on any given night. At Housing Alliance, we track that using the data system. We partner very closely with the VA. We still have regular bi-weekly meetings. We actually see on a piece of paper the name of every homeless veteran or veteran family on a piece of paper and identify a housing resource for them. So we're really continuing to track our progress around veteran homelessness. And so we went from about 100 to 120 on any given night down to 40 to 45 on any given night. So we've made a lot of progress. Over 850 homeless veterans have gotten permanent housing since 2015 in Delaware. So that huge investment in resources, and it's not just the housing subsidies, it's also the wraparound support services, the case management. It's just been really amazing to see. And so, you know, when I talk about how like we really believe if we put the resources together and line it, like we really feel like ending homelessness in Delaware is doable. You know, we know what the solution is. We've done a lot of work with that around the veteran population. 40 is still too many, not to say that that's not a problem, but we've made a lot of progress. So,
And
that's
there
awesome.
is the Home of the Brave. The Home of the Brave shelter is for homeless veterans, male and female, so they do have a specific program to address them. But we see several a year that if there isn't space at the Home of the Brave, and sometimes they're referred to us. So, and then we always refer them to the Veteran Services and make sure that they're connected with all the services that are available.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank you all for coming in your time tonight, and thank you for that, I guess, unexpected introduction. So I'm a fair housing attorney with Community Legal Aid in Georgetown, and I'm doing a little bit more work on landlord-tenant issues, so I can speak a little bit to what we do with the housing stuff. With fair housing, obviously, we'll work on any issues of housing discrimination or issues with accommodations for folks with disabilities. We also then handle bring it down too short for this. And then we'll work with individuals having or in subsidized housing having issues with their landlord or eviction So we'll take issues with subsidized housing and then refer to Legal Services Corporation for private landlord-tenant issues. So my, I guess, question for you would be, or for the three of you, besides like the obvious evictions and maybe issues with criminal records and trying to obtain housing, what, or if you've been able to identify any unmet, I guess, legal issues that the folks that you work with might be experiencing that are a little less obvious that contribute to their homelessness.
I'll just repeat that. Help getting disability income. So a lot of folks who may have a diagnosed disability, who are experiencing homelessness and have a really, it can take years to get disability income. So that's a big one. It's more about income versus housing, but it's obviously very directly related, especially because once you're able to get disability income, you can qualify for all types of housing resources you might otherwise not be able to qualify for. But I just stole that from an audience member.
And I will say that Tony's got some brochures in the back there about their fair housing, if you'd like to pick one up on your way out.
Hi, my name is Joan Ligger Smith. I'm the director for the Community Resource Center. And thank you so much for being here tonight. I just want to piggyback on a couple of things. Someone mentioned about, that many of the working poor are just one crisis away from homelessness. And so there's a lot of things going on in the community. At the Community Resource Center, we work with a lot of clients to the tune of about $350,000 a year to help prevent homelessness by keeping people in their homes, preventing eviction. Talking about the legal aspect, Marie mentioned one of the programs, innovative programs that her organization is involved with through the Delaware State Housing Authority and Home for Good. The state is doing a lot of work around this issue. And so the Locator program, the initiative, is one of them. The Community Resource Center, along with, I think, Catholic Charities, has homeless prevention. And one of the new innovative programs is with CLASSY, the Community Legal Aid Society, where they're providing another safety net for people in the court systems who are facing eviction, that final judgment, to try to negotiate with the landlords and try to keep people stably housed. So while there is a lot going on, there's a lot of social issues, and just logistics issues with affordable housing and transportation. The state and supporting organizations are doing a lot to try to keep people in their homes. Thank you.
I just wanted to go back to what you said. I think I'd like to be a little messy and a little less nice. I think one of the biggest issues down here in Sussex County is that we're all too damn nice about homelessness. And having done this for 10 years, when I go back and I hear things like, my children can't play on the street because there's homeless people on Belltown and Route 9. And so now we moved here for a better life and they're gonna have to stay in the house. Homeless people are all predators, and they're all part of the legal system, and we're gonna have to deal with addicts and needles and paraphernalia all around. I think that one of the hidden legal issues, political issues, is ignorance. And it's tremendous, and no matter how hard you try, if I have one more, as I said, and I'll say it here because I don't really have anything to lose, one more smiling face local politician tell me that they're gonna help us, but just go down the road a bit. Or, as one said to me, I'll back you up with your Hebron Road project, which I will say from my own admission was my own ignorance about West Rehoboth community, where it came from, what it meant, and I thought I was doing a wonderful thing by providing for some people in West Rehoboth who were homeless, but also for others. And I didn't ask. I didn't ask if it would be helpful. So that was my ignorance. But when I went to that person for support and help, and he came to me and he said, you know, I grew up with those people, I just can't support you. And really I said, you grew up in West Rehoboth? I'm in shock. And it's just so nice. And I know to make change is messy. And it can't always be so nice. I think that's one of the legal issues is we have people out there that, you know, have nowhere to turn. So I don't know, I just needed to.
Hi, Jenny. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Just in terms of legal issues, I do just want to mention, and Janet mentioned it earlier, just around the issue of criminalization of activities that people who have no place to stay cannot avoid. People need to sit, people need to sleep. These are basic human needs. And when people are sitting or sleeping or existing in public spaces because they don't have a private place to do so, oftentimes they end up being involved in the criminal justice system for those activities. There's been maybe not a lot, there's been some legal precedent in other places in the country about the constitutionality of that, and I would really like to see someone in Delaware do something around that issue, because there are a lot of localities continuing to tighten and pass more restrictive nuisance laws that makes it easier for them to criminalize homelessness. So I felt the need to say that.
I think actually you may have answered my question before I got a chance to ask it, so thank you. But I wanted to ask a question about your data. It's wonderful data, the little you gave tonight. And it certainly gave me a sense of the profile of homeless in Sussex County. And yet when I go to a hearing at County Council, for example, when Just Soup was looking for a variance, well, community neighbors got up and talked about the rapists and the murderers that were going to infest the neighborhood, and told terrible stories. Their profile of what a homeless person looked like was monstrous, and of course, Just Soup didn't get their variance. I wonder why you don't share that information. Just as I said, our goal is education. Perhaps the people who lived in those communities surrounding the church had a sense of who is homeless, and those short periods of time, and the many facts that why people are homeless, they might do less of the NIMBY behavior.
Well, having worked in mental health,
Having worked in mental health most of my career, I can tell you that when we wanted to build a psychiatric unit in a particular area, the issues were the same. You're going to bring in a bunch of crazy people, they're going to tear down the neighborhood. Statistics don't bear that to be true, and I have gone and talked, both personally and at the council level. Typically, your property values go up about 3% when you have a shelter in your area or transitional housing, because we want to be good neighbors. We want to have good-looking property. We want to do better than we have to normally do, because we want to be the people that send someone out to shovel your driveway or help you take the groceries in. And that's what's been borne out, is that it's more of a positive effect on the community. And I'm not talking an inner city where you might have a shelter every other corner or an SRO. But that's very difficult to assuage people's fears. Once you conjure up, I don't even like to say homeless people. I love Jim's term, roofless, you know, because it takes it away. Kind of gives you space for God too, because if you're roofless, you know, you can accept whatever's coming. I think it's a great term. And I like to say those experiencing homelessness, because it really is the experience of homelessness. But you know, it really is anybody. If I die, my wife can't stay in our house. There's just no way. I was the major bread earner, and her Social Security and pension are not going to cover it. and we've had a very good lifestyle all our lives, but it's not real. So it affects everyone. And so I think, yeah, we need to do more of that. We need to do more of that collectively too. I think that's
And Margot, I think willful ignorance is clearer than just ignorance.
Yes.
Thank you.
I can give you another example of, is it on? Yeah. Of the same kind of thing. The crisis house, we tried to build a new shelter about 7 years ago. And we have where our transitional housing is, we own the whole city block. So we have a big area there. And the crisis house is very old. It's even older than me. And believe it or not. And we keep it together with a song and a prayer. So we had a local builder was going to build the structure for us, and then we were going to raise funds to finish it off. So we went through the whole gamut of getting all the variances and everything. We got to the last step at the town council to get the final approval, and somebody, I don't even know who, had gone around to the neighbors far away from our area to come and talk to the council and say, we don't want them in our neighborhood. They couldn't get it in their head. We're already in your neighborhood. We're moving a block and a half down, and we're going to have a nicer, newer shelter. It's going to be the same shelter. And they talked about pedophiles and sex offenders and rapists and everything else, and all the ones that are on their street. And we're looking at them like, that's not us. We're going a block and a half away to build a new shelter. It's the same people, we're just moving. And after spending about $50,000 of funds to get all the prep work and studies and architecture and engineering, the council denied it and said, you can't build. So there's another example of ignorance.
Change the council.
Right. Well, it has changed now, but now we don't have another 50,000 to go back and do all the same
If
work.
everybody in the county paid $10 more on their property taxes, you could have a shelter.
So,
If the neighbors agree.
All right, let's keep the conversation to one.
Okay. I come from a background of homelessness, working to build a shelter in Wilmington. The site that we were going to use was an old, really old building that was owned by the state, and it had been abandoned for like 8 years. And it was a perfect site, big area around it, big building, lots of things we could do. And when we really decided that that was where we were going to go, I spent almost a year going around that neighborhood, meeting in every church and every place where they had a meeting or where they had food collections or anything like that. I would go and talk to them about homelessness. And one of the questions I would ask is the question that I'll ask all of you. If you lost your job or you lost your partner of life, how long would you be able to function independently, keep your home, pay your bills, get your food? How long would that last? And most people, if they really sit down and think about it, would know that probably under a year, you would be faced with homelessness. It is a fact.
Use the mic.
Oops. It is a fact. And so if you think about that, and you think of how many people have become homeless because of like battered women with children, where do they go? Is it their fault that they're homeless? No. And where do they go to be safe with their children? So the shelters represent a really big part. The only problem I have, the shelter that I worked to get open, worked with other people, lots of people, was what we called a continuous care shelter. You could stay at that shelter for a year and a half if you followed the program. Sobriety, going to school, learning a trade, improving yourself. If you continued that, you could stay in the shelter. Once you got a job, you went to the bank, you opened a checking account, you opened a savings account, and every payday, you put money in the bank. So that when it was time for you to go, you had money to do it.
Can you,
You have a question?
just room for one more question, time for one more question.
Yeah.
Is there a question, or do you?
No, the thing is that the viewpoint is that in 30, 60, or 90 days, you can improve your entire life. You can be a whole
Yeah, I
new
think
person
one
and
of
do
them
it.
Right.
And you can.
Not gonna happen.
So continuing shelters that keep you longer periods of time, give you an opportunity to learn a trade, go to school, save your money, and then go out the world, will end a lot of the homelessness.
Okay.
And separating people who are chronically
Thank you.
homeless
Thank you.
from the regulars,
It's gotta,
Thank
it's
you
gotta
very much.
touch all.
We've got two people behind you,
Right.
and we really, we're hopefully make your questions very brief and to the point, please. Thank you.
I have a limited experience with this, but I just recently helped someone transition from SCI into the Georgetown community and get employment with Purdue. That's serious, in and out of a couple houses. But what is amazing to me at 37 or 38 years of age, no financial skills whatsoever, nothing. And then, you know, Purdue, when you get permanent, they give you a debit card. And so you have this magic card that is your pay. You don't know what hours you work, what pay you got, you know, they're blank. And I wonder, where's the education on finances? So they begin how to get to a bank, what's available. Is there a cheap bank, you know? Is there one that helps people like this? All the financial facts is what I'm wondering about
Criminal justice.
to help. Thank you.
Very briefly. Do any of you have any thoughts on that? Okay, great. Anne?
Okay, I got it.
Well, just to give the woman some hope, there are 18 bills coming up in the General Assembly, criminal justice bills, and one of them does deal with adding more services within the prison so that people are better prepared when they come out of the system. So we have to hope that that's one of the 18 bills that will be passed.
Thanks.
Does that include food at SCI? Enough food?
No, you said education.
Right,
I'm
right,
just
right.
dealing with the education. There are 18 bills, maybe some of the others deal with food.
I was involved in Baltimore with an organization called Back on Your Feet, which has organizations in about, 20, 30 cities around the country where you get up and you run with people who are experiencing homelessness, and you run with them 3 days a week. If they show up 96% of the time, then that entitles them for a month. If they do that, then that entitles them to some help with resume building. Then they do that again for another month, that they get entitled to better housing. It's like an incremental program. Volunteers come and run with them at 5:30 in the morning. I was running in Penn North, for example, which is where Freddie Gray was arrested. Is there anything like that here? And is it possible, do you think, that there would be any homeless facilities that would support that kind of activity?
Good question.
You said running, like
Right.
exercise running?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, we would run 1, 2, or 3 miles, depending upon the ability. Some of them could only walk, but they would show up. And then we would also train them for marathons, 5Ks, 10Ks.
Okay. I have not heard of something like that in Delaware. I know for a lot of folks, at least in my experience, and I'm not a direct service provider currently, but I did work at a
day center, so most of the folks that I worked with were adults that were sleeping outside, and then we also ran like a Code Purple crisis shelter. This was in Cecil County, Maryland. Most of the folks, at least that I worked with, probably were not in the condition to do so, or were walking so much already just to get from place to place. It was a rural area, so their feet were worn and tired by the end of the day, just getting their basic needs met. At least that's the folks that I worked with. I don't know if you all can think of a way that might make sense.
Yeah, I think there might be opportunity for that concept. It's a great one. The majority of people that we see probably are also not in shape now to run, but it would be something that might be a great educational and then impetus for health. Certainly, we have started health screening this year at our shelter, which is one of the first times. So BB population care comes, and we do diabetes screening, cholesterol screening, high blood pressure, flu vaccines, HIV, STD. So we're trying to address pneumonia shots. We're trying to address those very needs. So that's like the next step in health, and there probably would be some people that would be able to participate in something like that.
Thank you. In closing, I just would like to ask each of you if there was one thing you'd like us to take away from tonight's presentation, something that we could do, something that you need. What is it that you would like us to take away tonight? And any one of you can start if you would.
Okay. The one thing that we need is participation on our board of directors. We had several deaths, not because I worked them to death, but so our board has shrunk, and believe it or not, it's not, I guess, popular to be on, a board. It's hard to get board members in central Sussex County. It's not a, great thing to do. So we are looking for some board members. And so if anyone is interested in participating, we're interested. I did bring some of our annual reports, and I'll put them in the back, and there's contact information, and it'll give you a little more information about some of the things we do. We have a lot of different services that I didn't talk about, but it'll give you a little more idea. But that's something I'd like you to take away with and think about if there's any volunteer opportunities that you want to take. We're over there willing to work with you.
Thank you, Marie.
We'll announce that to the membership.
So I think I'll go back to what Charlotte said and say that I think one way, if this is an issue that you really care about, one way to really contribute is, when there are proposals for housing developments or affordable housing, when there are local hearings, having people, usually when people are against something, they're much more excited to go speak about it than people who are happy about something. So if you are ever motivated to do so, having folks with a voice, a compassionate voice for this population around the table, part of the public discourse in these public settings, is really, really critical. So I would encourage you to do that if you're interested.
Thank you, Rachel.
I guess for us, the one thing that I'd like you to take away is that I'll piggyback off of Marie. Homelessness isn't really sexy, so we don't have great numbers of board members either, and it is difficult. But I'd like you to take a look, if you don't have any information about trauma-informed care. It's all over the internet. It is eye-opening when you begin to look at what the physiological changes are to the brain and people's thinking who have been traumatized. It gives you an insight into not only what might be going on, but why it's so hard for people to make change. So I think that's one thing that's really important if you're interested. And I have brochures in the back about the shelter. Thanks.
Great. Well, you've got your marching orders. I hope you do take something away from this for tonight. Thank you so much for coming out, because it shows that you care. Let's thank our guests one more time.